Part 29. She Always Loves to Sleep. Author, Guy and Faye. Chapter 282. Chapter 282. No one wants to inherit the family property. First update. Dad, he is my eldest brother, don't I even have the qualifications to say happy birthday? Li Hong's eyes darkened. You are too cruel to me. As soon as he said these words, Li Chen sneered, with a very disdainful expression, as if he had heard some big joke. I don't need you to tell me happy birthday because the sight of you makes me sick. Li Hong's face darkened instantly, and a hint of ferocity flashed under his eyes, but it quickly disappeared. Brother, I didn't mean what happened to Ayan back then. Why do you always hold on to me? When Li Chen heard this, he stood up and glared at Li Hong angrily. I told you that you have no right to call her by her name. Enough. Mr. Li shouted, shocking both of them. Have you had enough? Li Hong, take your daughter and leave immediately. Li Hong's eyes widened in disbelief. He stood up angrily and asked, why? However, Mr. Li did not give him an extra look, let alone answer his question. Li Hong just stared at him, his heart sinking to the bottom little by little. It was as if someone poured a basin of cold water on his head, and he was shrouded in chill from head to toe. Well. Finally recognizing Mr. Li's attitude, Li Hong didn't feel sad at this time, but only filled with anger. He glanced at everyone with a sinister gaze and sneered, it seems I'm not welcome here, okay. I'm leaving. That's it? But father, I really don't understand what good thing my eldest brother has that makes you so partial. Don't forget, he abandoned the Li family for a woman, it was me. Li Hong pointed at himself, looking a little excited. I took over this mess when the Li family was in trouble, but now, you only think about paving the way for him in your eyes. Is he the only one who is your son, huh? Now that the company has a problem, you are not even willing to help me. This is the company you built with your own hands. Don't you have the slightest bit of reluctance to give up? Li Hong was so angry that he kept breathing heavily, his face turned red from holding back, as if he was about to push it out at any time. He just doesn't understand. Mr. Li will definitely know about Li's current situation, so why should he turn a blind eye and remain indifferent? Isn't this the country he conquered when he was young? Now that Mr. Li is about to be unable to hold on any longer, he has tried to find Mr. Li many times but he has been put off by him for various reasons. What does this mean? Do you want to completely give up on Li Shi and give up on him? Li Hong couldn't figure it out anyway, until he heard the news that Li Chen was back and wouldn't leave. Oh, it turns out that even if you give up on him, Li Chen is still here. Similarly, people like Li Chen have been incomparable to him since he was a child, and everything in the Li family must be handed over to him. But is he worthy? Is he worthy of being the heir to the Li family if he lives a decadent life for a woman, abandons the Li family and Mr. Li, and travels around the world without a care? He is not convinced. Li Hong's eyes burst out with a sharp cold light, and he was darkly hostile to Li Chen. As long as he is here, he will never give up the Li family to him, absolutely not. Li Yun, who was standing behind Li Hong, saw that his expression was getting more and more agitated, and worriedly held his arm, fearing that something would happen to him. There was a brief silence in the atmosphere. After a long while, Mr. Li said, so, your purpose of coming here is for the Li family. Li Hong was silent. Mr. Li sighed and waved his hand as if to compromise, let's go. Okay, don't regret it. Li Hong sneered, turned around and took Li Yun away without hesitation. After the two of them left, Li Chen closed his eyes, his face looked a little ugly, he stumbled, fell down on the chair, and pressed his forehead with a headache. Li Tingzi quickly stepped forward to support him, Dad, are you okay? Li Chen waved his hand to indicate that he was fine, then turned to ask Mr. Li, Dad, what's wrong with Mr. Li? He knew Li Hong well. If he hadn't really had no other choice, he would definitely not have come to his door. But this time he came, which meant that the situation was no longer under his control. And it has been more than 2 months since he visited the imperial capital, and he has not heard any news at all. The only reason is that someone does not want him to hear it. As for this person, there is no one else but Mr. Li. He could guess his purpose without telling him, he was just a little curious about the current situation. You have been abroad these years and do not understand the internal situation of the Li family. The current Li family is almost an empty shell, Mr. Li said. Li Chen was slightly surprised for a moment, but it seemed that he could have expected it. After all, with Li Hong's ability, he could not manage the Li family at all. Mr. Li sighed, I had expected that Li would reach this point, but I didn't expect it to happen so quickly. Li Chen lowered his eyes, a flash of apology flashed in his eyes. I'm sorry, Dad, it's all my fault for being willful and causing you trouble all these years. Mr. Li waved his hand, it's okay, Ah Shen. I said that although you are my son, whether you take over the Li family is entirely up to you. If you don't want to take care of it, I won't stop you even if the sky is high and the sea is vast. As for the Li family, he smiled and said, I'm not too old to move yet. It's okay to take care of it for a few more years. When Tingzi or Mue grow up, I'll leave it to them. When Li Mue heard this, he was so frightened that he quickly refused, Grandpa, don't be kidding me. I can't even manage a few bars and internet cafes, so why should I manage the Li family? Forget it, I don't want it. Li Tingzi also frowned, that's right, Grandpa, I'm working in the army now, and I have no plans to retire. Mr. Li. Mr. Li was so angry that his beard curled up, his eyes widened, and he looked at Li Chen and his son angrily. The Li family is just a hot potato in your eyes, no one wants it, right? The father and son looked at each other and remained silent. The meaning is obvious. Mr. Li felt that sooner or later he would be angered to death by them, so he waved his hand to tell them to go away. Go, 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 everyone is getting angry just looking at them, so get out of here. He just couldn't understand why the Li family didn't want to inherit the property accumulated by their ancestors for generations. Those who want to inherit the Li family don't have the ability, and sooner or later they will lose all their property. Those who have the ability don't want to inherit the family property, and everyone resists. Mr. Li couldn't help but have a trace of self-doubt. Is it possible that the Li family's wealth is really so bad that no one wants to see it? If this is the case, then he might as well consider selling his family property. Li Chen and others saw that Mr. Li was angry and their eyes flickered with guilt. They did not dare to look at his face, so they stood up and left. Li Ju followed them and was about to go out. Unexpectedly, Mr. Li suddenly stopped her and said, Xiaoju, you stay here first. Li Ju took a step forward. Tisk, 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 folks, guess what Mr. Li wants to do if he leaves Mr. Ju behind. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfei. Chapter 283. Chapter 283. Are you willing to take over the Li family? Second update. In fact, Li Ju had been doubtful since he was called up by Mr. Li. No matter how he looked at it, this matter had nothing to do with her, so why did he have to bring her with him? Now, Li Ju felt that she was about to know the reason. Grandfather. Li Ju stopped walking out, turned around and returned to her original place, sitting on the chair where Li Chen had just sat, with her legs crossed and a very loose posture. She looked at Mr. Li and asked, what do you want to say to me? Mr. Li moved his lips, looking like he was hesitant to speak, as if he didn't know what to say to her. Li Ju was not in a hurry and sat there quietly waiting for Mr. Li to speak. Let me tell you a story, Mr. Li sighed. Have you heard of your eldest aunt? Li Ju shook his head. Your aunt is as her name suggests. She is a very gentle and beautiful woman. Your uncle once went to a mountainous area to inspect a project. He lost his way on the way into the mountain. The mountain is huge, so it was difficult to find someone. It was raining that night, so others almost thought that your uncle would never come back, but the next day, a woman covered in mud helped your uncle out of the mountain. Yes, she was your aunt. Li Ju touched the tip of her tongue lightly to her chin and sighed twice. She didn't expect that Li Chen and Wen Wen's first meeting would be a cliché situation where a beauty saves a hero. Later, my uncle found out that she was from a nearby mountainous area and her family was in dire straits. To express his gratitude, he gave her a job and brought her out of the mountains. After a while, your uncle fell in love with Ayan, and I was happy to see it happen. Soon they decided to get married. 2 years after we got married, Tingzi and Makino were born one after another, and then another girl was born. I named her Li 11, the 11 of the morning Sunday. Li Ju raised an eyebrow. Li 11? Interest. Grandpa, are you sure this is a personal name? Li Ju curled her lips, feeling that Mr. Li's ability to come up with names was quite touching. But then again, why has she never heard of this Li 11? Could it be? Mr. Li continued, your uncle is becoming more and more proficient in the Li family's industry. I planned to let him take over the Li family's business, but I didn't expect that because I paid too much attention to Ah Chen and devoted almost all my efforts to him. It actually makes Ah Hong feel dissatisfied. At this point, Mr. Li couldn't go on. He closed his eyes, and all that flashed in his mind were the scenes of that day. Ah Hong had a big fight with Ah Chen over a project, and later he got involved and sent Ah Chen to the hospital, where he was in a coma for 7 days. After Ah Chen heard about it, he immediately took Zioxy to the hospital unexpectedly. They were kidnapped on the way to the hospital. Li Ju was stunned and almost choked at this development. Kidnapping? Kidnapping? What happens after that? Li Ju asked. After that, alas, Mr. Li sighed heavily, his whole person seemed to have gone through many years of vicissitudes. According to the police, Ayan and Zioxy were discovered by the kidnappers on the way to escape and were brutally tortured. Mr. Li closed his eyes heavily. When we arrived, there was only a sea of fire. Ah Chen couldn't bear the blow and almost went crazy. If Tingzi and Makino hadn't been with him all the time, he might have followed him. Ayan and Zioxy went. Although Ah Chen recovered in the end, he is still very depressed. He often hugs the photos of Ah Wen and Xiao 11 and stays drunk all day long. Later I couldn't stand it any longer, so I sent him abroad to relax. A year later, he told me that he didn't want to inherit the Li family and wanted to fulfill the promise he and Ayan had made before to travel around the world. His mental condition was extremely unstable at the time, so I had no choice but to let him go. Ah Chen had always hated Ah Hong very much. If it hadn't been for him, perhaps Ah Wen wouldn't have been kidnapped, and nothing would have happened after that. Yes, Li Ju nodded clearly. No wonder Li Chen hated Li Hong so much. After Ah Shen leaves, Ah Hong will be the only one left. Even if I don't want to, the Li family will still be handed over to him, but you also know that Ah Hong's ability is not enough to control the entire Li family. I handed Li Shi over to him. I originally wanted to temper his temperament, hoping that he would retreat and curb his ambitions. Unexpectedly, he teamed up with Li Shi's old shareholders to hollow out Li Shi. Now I want to let me fill this loophole for him. Mr. Li snorted coldly. Li Ju was not too surprised. She had known these things for a long time. Although Li Hong claimed to be the head of the Li family, as long as Mr. Li did not admit it, he would still be unfair. It's a pity that he still foolishly thinks that the Li family is equal to the Li family. The Li family has a century-old foundation, so how could the wealth accumulated be what it appears on the surface? It would be too naive to think so. Mr. Li sighed and shook his head. I really can't understand my son more and more. He obviously doesn't have the ability, but he has such ambition, eager for quick success, and greed. He has made a Li family like this. How could I possibly treat Li, leave it to him? He is not an old fool anymore. If the family property accumulated by the Li family's ancestors for generations was lost to Li Hong because of his decision, how would he be able to meet the Li family's ancestors 100 years later? Li Ju looked at him sighing and couldn't help but said, "Grandpa, don't worry. Isn't the uncle back? Can't you just leave the Li family to him with peace of mind?" Mr. Li smiled bitterly, "I would like to, but Ah Shen told me that he has thought clearly over the years and does not want to be bound by these things. He still prefers to be more free. So he didn't want to inherit the Li family at all." Li Ju. In this case, wouldn't the Li family be like goods thrown into the hands, no one wants them anymore? Tingzi is in the army, and Makino is too arrogant. The two of them have no interest in the Li family at all. Your uncle refuses, and I can't give it to your father. As for Xiaoun, she won't mention it, etc. Why did she suddenly have a bad feeling? Li Ju narrowed her eyes, feeling that what he was about to say might not make her very happy. As expected, the next moment, Mr. Li turned to look at her. After much thought, "You are the only one who is most suitable. Xiaju, are you willing to take over the Li family?" Li Ju. Li Ju. So Grandpa, you just called me up and told me these things just to let me inherit the Li family. Li Ju's expression went blank for a moment, his pupils suddenly opened wide, and the corners of his mouth twitched as he looked at Mr. Li. "But Grandpa, I don't know how to manage the Li family." Mr. Li waved his hand with a smile, "It's okay. I asked you to be Xiaosai's secretary before just to let you learn more about this aspect. What's more, you and Xiaosai are already engaged, and the Li family will leave it to you. If you don't understand something, you can ask him." Li Ju. So you ask me to be Qi Jinkai's secretary and ask me to get engaged to him, just to prepare for today. Is this hole dug a little deep? Li Ju forced a smile out of the corner of her mouth. The CEO behind MZ. The head of the MO family. Now here comes the head of the Li family. It's better to let her die. It was so scary here that she suddenly wanted to go back to the association. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 284. Chapter 284 Yelling and Shouting at the Li family, first update. When Li Ju first came to Li's house, he felt that Mr. Li was definitely not as kind as he seemed on the surface, but what he didn't expect was that he was such an old fox. He actually hit her several times in a row. Li Ju didn't know what expression to make for a moment. "Xiaju, I decided to hand over the Li family to you after careful consideration." Mr. Li looked at her with a smile. Although she was usually more casual, he was sure that the Li family would be better off in her hands. Li Ju twitched the corner of her mouth. She was relatively lazy, and MZ and the MO family had no choice. If she really took over the Li family, her clean days would really come to an end. What's more, she has no intention of staying at the Li family forever. One day she will leave. The Li family would be a constraint for her. Furthermore, she is not from the Li family. After thinking about it, Li Ju finally frowned and refused. "I'm sorry, Grandpa, I really can't accept it." Mr. Li's expression remained unchanged and he said, "It doesn't matter. I also know that it's not right to hand over the entire Li family to you all of a sudden. You can take your time." "Grandfather?" Li Ju lowered her voice to make her tone sound more serious. "I have no interest in the Li family. In other words, I don't like it." She stared straight at Mr. Li, with unprecedented seriousness in her eyes. Looking at each other for a long time, Mr. Li was defeated, sighed, and said, "Forget it, Since you don't like it, I can't force you, just dash. He paused and said, well, it seems that I have to continue to worry about it, old man, and I can't afford to be lazy anymore. Originally, he wanted to hand over the Lee family as soon as possible so that he could be clean. But he didn't expect that no one, whether it was his son, grandson, or granddaughter, wanted to take on this burden. Li Ju couldn't laugh or cry, Grandpa, you can ask your uncles to help you. Although they don't want to manage the Lee family, they can still help you handle things, right? Mr. Lee snorted, you think I can't think of this? It's just that the father and son are said to run faster than rabbits when something happens. It's better to count on them than on air. It doesn't matter, the affairs of the Lee family are also very complicated. I'm afraid no one will be able to adapt to it for a while. It's also a waste of time. Thinking about it, it would be better for him to continue managing the Lee family. Seeing that Mr. Lee finally gave up the crazy idea just now, Li Ju breathed a sigh of relief. Grandpa, if nothing happens, I'll go down first. Looking at Li Ju's fleeing back, Mr. Lee couldn't help but laughed and cursed in a low voice, you bastard. Would it be wrong for you to inherit the Lee family? Everyone is afraid to avoid it. Alas, when people are old, they want to be lazy, but this group of young people refuse to let them. Forget it, he'd better worry about it for a while longer. Although the imperial capital seems to be calm now, some people can't stand it any longer. As long as he is alive, he will protect the descendants of the Lee family and will never let those people take advantage of them. As soon as Li Ju came downstairs, he heard a noise coming from the living room. Xiaoshu. How many times have I told you that the Yun family is your home? Be obedient and come back with me, okay? Yunyan sat in front of Ji Yunchu, with a fake smile on her face, constantly looking for topics to talk to Ji Yunchu. Ji Yunchu sat quietly on the sofa, took a sip of tea, raised his head and glanced at them lightly, and said sarcastically, home? Now that the Yun family is my home, why did you go there a few years ago? You dash. Yunyan was just about to get angry, but out of the corner of her eye she caught sight of Qi Jingkai and Li Chen sitting beside them, and she swallowed her words back. Xiaoshu, you misunderstood us. A few years ago, I didn't even know where you were. Chy Guang followed Yunyan and echoed, yes, Xiaoshu, I haven't heard from you in these years. We only recently found out that you are in the imperial capital. The two people spoke sincerely, turning the Yun family's indifference to Ji Yunchu over the years into a last resort, which made people feel very moved. However, it is a pity that no matter what they told about the flower, no one here believed it. Lim Wei lazily leaned on the sofa, supporting his head with his hands. He looked at the Yun couple's performance as if they were mentally retarded. He couldn't help complaining to Li Tingzi next to him, I'm embarrassed by this acting, but they are too embarrassed to explain. Li Tingzi raised his eyelids without saying much, and lowered his head again to look at the military magazine in his hand. Hey, brother, aren't you worried about Dr. Ji? Lim Wei asked quietly. He is neither blind nor stupid. He has long known that Ji Yunchu is his future sister-in-law. So he was very surprised when he saw Ji Yunchu being harassed by the Yun family, but Li Tingzi was indifferent. Li Tingzi didn't even raise his head. What am I worried about? I heard that those people in the Yun family are lunatics. What if DRG really goes back with them and something happens? To be honest, it was an unexpected surprise for him after he found out that Ji Yunchu was from the Yun family. It is impossible to tell the difference between a person and a person. I never expected that a person like DRG would come out of the pile of mud in the Yun family. Of course, he did not mean to belittle Ji Yunchu. Li Tingzi said calmly, it's okay, she won't go back. Why? Li Tingzi glanced at him sideways, because I know her. Lim Wei pursed his lips and rolled his eyes in his heart. Look at what he said with a hint of pride, what's so great about it? Is it something to be proud of knowing your future daughter-in-law? Xiaoshu, your grandpa misses you too. Are you really not going to go back and see him? Yunyan saw that Ji Yunshu was still indifferent no matter what she said, so she gritted her teeth and did not hesitate to move Mr. Yun out. Unexpectedly, Ji Yunshu still ignored him. I'm sorry, my surname is Ji, not Yun. As soon as these words came out, the expression on Yunyan's face finally lost its expression. Ji Yunshu, don't be shameless. After she said these words with a gloomy face, she suddenly felt a chill rising up her spine, causing her heart to palpitate. Yunyan looked around with twinkling eyes, but found nothing strange. However, where she couldn't see him, Li Tingzi's face darkened, and the air pressure around his body dropped instantly, almost freezing him to death. Lim Wei, who was sitting next to him, saw his ugly expression and immediately moved away from him. On the stairs not far away, Li Ju raised his eyebrows slightly, a cold light flashed under his eyes, and the corners of his mouth curved in a playful way. Ji Yunshu placed the cup on the coffee table with a snap, making a crisp sound that made Yunyan's eyelids twitch. You have no shame. I should be the one saying this to you, right? Don't forget, this is the Li family. Mrs. Yun, you are shouting and shouting in front of Master Qi and the Li family. Are you not taking them seriously? Yunyan's face suddenly changed. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfei. Chapter 285. Chapter 285. What second brother? It's the second cousin, second update. Yunyan subconsciously cast her gaze in the direction of Qi Jingkai and Li Chen. Seeing that they didn't seem to notice them, she couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. However, the next second, Li Tingzi suddenly spoke, which made her heart suddenly lift. Mrs. Yun, Ashu is my invited guest. If you speak to her like this in our house, can I think that you are slapping me in the face? Li Tingzi narrowed his eyes, and the coldness in his eyes flashed away. He put the magazine he was holding aside and stared at Yunyan so hard that her scalp went numb. No, that's not the case, Mr. Li, you misunderstood. Yunyan smiled and explained, I was so angry just now that I couldn't speak out. Xiaoshu is my niece, how could I be willing to scold her? Oh, this is best. Li Tingzi said coldly, but Ashu doesn't want to go back with you, so don't force her anymore, right? Yunyan laughed dryly and said nonchalantly, that's nature, that's nature. At this moment, Li Chen suddenly said, do you two have anything else to do today? Yunyan and Chu Huiguang looked at each other. Well, we are here this time because my father's birthday banquet is coming soon, so we want to invite Mr. Li and all of you to attend. I met the head of the Li family at the door before, so we came together. Unexpectedly, Li Hong and Li Yun came down from the second floor angrily just now, and rushed out the door without looking back, without even looking at them. In that case, your words have been brought here, so we won't keep you two for too long. This means to drive people away naked. Yunyan's face looked a little unhappy, but due to the presence of Qi Jingkai and Li Chen, she suppressed her anger and went back. She stood up and said to Li Chen, then we won't bother you anymore and leave. The two of them walked out of Li's house. Yunyan's face immediately darkened, and she clutched the bag in her hand tightly with both hands. Looking at her sinister face, Chu Huiguang said with concern, Yin, don't be angry. Go away. Yunyan slapped his hand on her shoulder away and said impatiently. Chu Huiguang's face changed, he put down his hand angrily, and did not dare to speak anymore. What a Ji Yunshu, you think it's a big deal just to catch up with the Li family, don't you? Yunyan sneered twice, that would be too naive. Does she think that with the support of the Li family and the Lu family, nothing can be done to her? We'll see. Yunyan turned back and took a deep look at the Li family, then turned and got into the car. The Yun family is gone. Li Ju hid at the corner of the stairs and eavesdropped for a long time, and did not come down until the Yun family and his wife left. "Well, let's go." Chi Jinkai handed her a cup of brewed tea. The temperature was just right and the time had obviously been set. Li Ju's eyes twitched and she glanced at him. "Did you just see me?" How could the temperature of the tea be controlled so well if she hadn't been found in the stairwell? Chi Jinkai glanced at her, his meaning was obvious. "What do you think?" Li Ju clicked her tongue, lowered her head and took a sip of tea. Lately, for some unknown reason, she drinks tea frequently, which makes people like her who don't understand tea almost fall in love with drinking tea. "Xiaju, what did Grandpa tell you?" Lim Wei leaned over and asked curiously. "It's nothing, just asking how I'm doing." Lim Wei's eyes immediately changed. He glanced at Chi Jinkai beside her and said meaningfully, "Grandpa must be curious about how far she and Chi Jinkai have developed. So Xiaju, how are you doing recently?" As he spoke, he kept winking at Li Ju. "Li Ju." Li Ju glanced at him angrily. "It's okay." "Ah." Lim Wei was a little disappointed. How could there be no situation? They all moved together, and there was no movement at all. The two of them were the same as before, with no development at all. Then what was the point of Mr. Li letting them live together in the first place? Lim Wei squinted his eyes, feeling that he might need to give them a push. "Xiaju, I would like to advise you as someone who has been there, don't be timid when you are at an age where you can do whatever you want, do whatever you want, don't back down from anyone you like, seize the great opportunity." He almost said this in Li Ju's ear, but Chi Jinkai, who always had a good ear, still heard it clearly. Chi Jinkai raised his eyebrows and his eyes fell on Lim Wei. Lim Wei was still talking there. "Look, how many older leftover women today still can't find a partner? Isn't it because they wasted their youth? You are engaged at such a young age, and your partner is Chi Jinkai. Many people are envious of her, but you don't cherish her at all." Lim Wei sighed, his tone was very regretful. "Chi Jinkai, if nothing else, has a good face. If you sleep with him, you will make money. And you don't have to spend money to sleep with him now. If he wants to sleep with you in the future, after breaking up, if you want to sleep with him again, then..." "Stop." Seeing that the topic was going to an unknown angle, Li Ju's face turned dark for a moment, and he immediately interrupted him. "It is said that the second son of the Li family is free-spirited and uninhibited. Now it seems that he is just talking nonsense. How can anyone teach his sister to sleep with a man? It's a good thing she's not his biological sister, otherwise she would definitely beat him to death. Xiaju, I'm serious. Although Chi Jinkai is a little worse than your brother, you won't suffer any loss if you try." Lim Wei raised his eyebrows at her, looking very proud. Li Ju pried off the hand that was on his shoulder, sneered at him twice, returned to sit next to Chi Jinkai, and ignored him. Lim Wei was a little confused and didn't know what he said wrong. However, due to the murderous look in Li Ju's last look, he didn't dare to say any more and could only go back and sit down angrily. "You second brother." Chi Jinkai picked up the teacup, his eyes darkened slightly, as if he was thinking about what words to use to describe Lim Wei, but found nothing. Li Ju paused for a moment, his eyes flashing slightly. "What second brother? He's his second cousin. Don't call him like he's a relative." Chi Jinkai raised his eyebrows. He saw that when she called her Li Tingzi, she was calling her big brother in a very affectionate manner. How come the polar opposites were reversed when she arrived at Lim Wei? It seems that Lim Wei really her off. A hint of smile flashed in Chi Jinkai's light gray eyes. While the two of them were talking, Ji Yuncha raised his wrist, looked at his watch, and said to Li Chen, "Uncle Li, I still have patients waiting for me, so I'll take my leave first." Li Chen frowned. "You won't have a day off today, Saturday." Ji Yuncha smiled and said, "In a small clinic, you have to take in more patients to make a living." Li Shen pondered for a moment, then secretly turned his eyes to Li Tingzi. Why is this kid moving so slowly? The whole family knows that he likes Ji Yunchu, but he still hasn't taken her down yet. Listen to what he said. Doesn't it hurt him at all that he has to go out to work on a day off? You should chase her down and give her your salary card. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 286. Chapter 286. These two sons are just wood. Li Chen expressed disappointment with Li Tingzi's speed. His eldest son was simply a piece of wood. He could tell that Ji Yunchu had no idea about Li Tingzi. The relationship between the two of them was very ambiguous now. As long as they worked harder, maybe it would work out. But his son was as if the fire suddenly went out and he never made any move. If the ink goes on, maybe people will run away. Li Chen sighed and said to Li Tingzi, Tingzi, please send DRG off. Good. The two of them walked out of the gate of Li's house. Li Tingzi asked, shall I drive you back to the clinic? Ji Yunchu shook his head, no, I'll go directly to the patient's home. It's not far from here. I can just walk there. Li Tingzi said oh, and then remained silent for a long time. He pursed his lips and said, then let me stay with you for a while. Okay. The two of them walked side by side on the street. No one spoke for a while, and the atmosphere became very silent. You. Li Tingzi cleared his throat and said, have you decided how to handle the matter with the Yun family? He had just learned about her relationship with the Yun family, and he was really surprised. The circle in the imperial capital was not large, and he had heard a little about the Yun family, but he felt that the Yun family was simply crazy. Now that I know that Ji Yunchu is the girl that the Yun family wanted to imprison back then, I feel even more distressed. Ji Yunchu lowered his head, casually picking up the stones on the road with his toes, and said nonchalantly, you have to deal with it slowly and teach them a lesson all at once. It's not enough. Slowly use the knife to make the body feel the pain more. Li Tingzi stared at her side face, feeling that his worries were unfounded. She was a ghost doctor, and she would retaliate even when she was most angry. How could she let herself suffer a loss? Rather than worrying about her, it is better to pity the Yun family who are about to suffer misfortune. So you came to imperial capital just for the Yun family? What if? Ji Yunchu asked. Li Tingzi curled his lips and felt slightly unhappy. He originally thought that she was accompanying him to the imperial capital. Thinking about it now, it is indeed a bit pretentious. Li family. After Li Tingzi took Ji Yunchu away, there was no one else left in the living room. Li Chen finally focused on Qi Jinkai, squinted his eyes, and suddenly turned to Li Ju and asked, Xiaju, are you living with him now, together? Li Ju was stunned for a moment, wondering why he suddenly asked this, and nodded. Li Chen glanced at Qi Jinkai and said, although it is true that you are engaged, you are not married after all. It is a bit hasty to suddenly live together. I know it was your grandfather who asked you to move there. He wanted to bring you two together. He had good intentions, but if you feel that you and Mr. Qi are not suitable, then living together is not a good idea. Qi Jinkai narrowed his eyes dangerously and looked at Li Chen. Li Chen looked back without showing any weakness. The eyes faced each other, and fire was splashing in all directions. Lim Wei on the side twitched his lips and moved away silently. Li Ju didn't seem to notice the intense look in their eyes, and nodded, thinking that what Li Chen said made sense. I understand what you said, uncle. I'm just staying in his house now, and the house outside is being renovated. I will move out in a few days. Qi Jinkai's eyes changed, and he looked at Li Ju sharply, with an imperceptible gnashing of teeth on his face. Li Chen curled his lips, feeling a sense of victory, and said, that's good if you think so. After all, your relationship with Mr. Qi-san is not good enough to live together. Your grandfather was really messing around before. I think it's you who is fooling around. A strong and angry voice came from the stairs. Li Chen's face froze, feeling embarrassed as if he had been caught saying bad things behind his back. Mr. Li looked at Li Chen coldly and said angrily, "Xiaju and Xiasai are an unmarried couple. Is there any problem in living together and cultivating a relationship?" Li Chen retorted, "But Dad, they are not married yet, this is a bit too soon." "Why is it so fast? Someone else's child was born not long after they got engaged, so why are they so fast just by living together?" Li Chen. Li Ju. Qi Jinkai. Child, child. Li Ju's eyes suddenly looked at Mr. Li in horror. What has he been thinking about all day? Why did she and Qi Jinkai discuss the child? Li Chen was helpless and speechless. "Dad, you are, simply unreasonable." Mr. Li glared at him, "Don't think that I don't know what you are thinking. Don't target Xiao Ci again, do you hear me?" No. That's true, old man. Why are you threatening and tempting me?" Mr. Li hummed twice and said, "Xiaju is the youngest, but he was the first to get engaged. He is much better than the two boys you gave birth to. They have lived for more than 20 years and have never even held a woman's hand. This father doesn't even think about it. It is good for him to arrive, but his own son does not care, but instead comes to provoke Xiaju and Xiao Ci." Li Chen was speechless. What could he reflect on? He was also helpless with the emotional intelligence of his two sons who had been bitten by dogs. I remember that when he first pursued Wen, he used all kinds of tricks in an endless stream, and he was different every day, making Wen very happy. When the two of them came here, they were like old wood, not enlightened at all. He also wondered that none of the two children followed him. Could it be that they followed their mother? The corner of Li Chen's mouth twitched, and he muttered twice in his heart, "I'm sorry, my wife, he didn't mean to say bad things sincerely." "Don't scold him in his sleep." Lim Wei listened to Mr. Li's disgusting words and said rather unconvinced, "Grandpa, I'm single because I like freedom and don't want a woman by my side. If I want to find a girlfriend, I just have to wave and she will definitely find her. People are chasing me." Mr. Li snorted coldly, "Wave? If you wave, you will only attract flies. If the cowhide is blown too much, it will be easily broken." Lim Wei's soul received a critical blow. When the critical blow came from his own grandfather, it unfortunately doubled, causing him to fall backward on the sofa with a cry, suffocate his face with a pillow, and shut himself up. Mr. Li still didn't want to let him go, and continued, "Look at Xiaju, and then look at you. I haven't been able to show up for a whole day, but why don't you find me a granddaughter-in-law?" Lim Wei sat up suddenly, pointed angrily at Li Ju and Qi Jinkai, and asked, "How do they look like a couple? From the moment they entered the house, they never held hands or hugged each other. What kind of love is that?" His words suddenly stopped, and the last word disappeared in his throat. His eyes suddenly opened wide, and he watched in disbelief as Qi Jinkai suddenly stretched out his hand, intertwined his fingers with Li Ju, and then took her in his arms in front of them. Into the arms. Li Ju was stunned. Li Chen almost choked. Lim Wei was dumbfounded. Only Mr. Li smiled with satisfaction and asked Lim Wei, "What did you want to say just now?" Lim Wei closed his eyes that were blinded by the flash. "I'm sorry for disturbing you. Everyone, yesterday's chapter has been revised and is ready to be read. In addition, school has started, and I have to update it once a day. End of this chapter." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 287. Chapter 287. Boss, you still need to work hard. Li Ju twitched the corner of his mouth, suddenly retracted his hand, and glanced at Qi Jinkai with a strange look. not understanding what he wanted to do. Qi Jinkai was glared at by Li Ju, his expression remained calm and calm. Lim Wei shut up angrily, not daring to talk nonsense anymore. Until Li Ju and Qi Jinkai left the Li family, Lim Wei was in a lack of interest as if he had been shocked. On the way back to Jingyuan, the two of them were silent, and the car was silent for a while. Suddenly, Li Ju asked, "Why did you do that just now?" Qi Jinkai stared straight ahead, pretending to be confused and said, "What kind?" Li Ju turned to glare at him, gritted his teeth and asked, "Why did you hug me just now?" Qi Jinkai looked at her, raised his lips and chuckled, and asked, "What if? Is it possible that your second cousin will question us? That's not what he wants." Li Ju made a sound, "If you doubt it, just question it. It's not true anyway. The relationship between the two of them is only superficially engaged, and Lim Wei's doubts are correct." Qi Jinkai's eyes darkened slightly, he glanced at her, then slammed on the brakes and stopped on the side of the road. Li Ju leaned forward due to inertia, and quickly grasped it. He frowned and looked at Qi Jinkai. "What are you doing?" Qi Jinkai pulled down the handbrake and put one hand on the steering wheel. He tilted his head and looked at her with deep eyes. Li Ju felt that she had fallen into a deep and unpredictable pool, which made her eyelids twitch. "Not real." Qi Jinkai's last word was raised, he looked at her meaningfully, and suddenly leaned down. The distance between the two suddenly narrowed, and he could feel the other's warm breath spraying on his face. Li Ju's heart skipped a beat, and she subconsciously wanted to hide back. However, there was the car door behind her, and she was unable to move forward or retreat. Qi Jinkai's cold eyes met hers, and she was clearly reflected in them, with an extremely serious expression. "Is this how you define our relationship?" Li Ju was stunned and asked, "What else? Isn't their relationship just that of good friends? What more definitions are needed? Is it possible that he doesn't want to be friends with her and wants to be her mortal enemy?" Qi Jinkai looked at her silently for a while, then lowered his eyelashes for a long time. He couldn't tell his emotion. "You and your two brothers are really alike. They are all the same wood." Li Ju frowned, not knowing why. "How do I resemble them?" "No matter in appearance or personality, they are not very similar." Qi Jinkai did not answer her. He just smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. Before she could ask clearly, Qi Jinkai straightened up and looked away. Li Ju noticed that his mood seemed to be getting a little bad, and frowned, but did not ask. "By the way, my house is almost finished. I will move out after a while and I won't bother you anymore," Li Ju said. Qi Jinkai tightened his grip on the steering wheel, took a deep breath, his eyes darkened slightly, and said in a deep voice, "You can continue to live in Jingyuan." "No need. Is it inconvenient for you to live in Jingyuan?" Li Ju shook his head, "No. To be honest, she quite likes the environment of Jingyuan, and the surrounding area is relatively clean." "Then continue to live." "Then don't you feel uncomfortable?" Li Ju asked with a frown. After all, it would be somewhat uncomfortable for a man and a woman to live together. And when she first moved in, Qi Jinkai seemed not used to it. "No," Qi Jing said, "I used to live alone, but now I'm used to you. If you move out again, I might feel even more uncomfortable." Li Ju's eyes twitched. What's the reason for this? But thinking about it carefully, it didn't matter if she continued to live there. She was mainly afraid that Qi Jinkai would be uncomfortable, so she wanted to move out. Since he said so, she wouldn't move if he didn't want to move. "Okay, I'm used to your breakfast here, so I won't move." Qi Jinkai glanced at her. Was breakfast the only thing that attracted her to Jingyuan? What's so delicious about that kind of takeout food? Qi Jinkai pursed his thin lips and his breath suddenly dropped. Li Ju glanced at him inexplicably, feeling that this man had been very fickle recently. Arrived at Jingyuan, Li Ju immediately rushed to the bed in the bedroom, not even seeing the increasingly livid face of Chi Jinkai behind him. She is so heartless that she is still drunk. Chi Jinkai suppressed the sullenness in his heart and felt that he might need to calm down, so he went into the study to deal with documents. Li Ju, who was lying on the bed, was looking at the ceiling with his eyes open, with complicated emotions in his eyes. Actually, she is not that slow, nor is she wooden. She has seen more or less the changes in Tiankai Jinkai, and the interlocking of fingers just now confirmed her suspicions. Thinking of this, Li Ju's eyes were full of irritation, and he covered his face with a pillow, feeling extremely depressed. She really didn't expect that Chi Jinkai would actually fall in love with her. I go. Li Ju's expression went blank for a moment, not knowing what to do. When she came to Imperial Capital, she had taken care of everything except this matter. She knew that getting engaged to Chi Jinkai was not a good thing. It's good now, he took it seriously and was tempted. This really made her depressed to death. Chi Jinkai, she thought of him as her enemy at first, but later he helped her a lot, and she naturally regarded him as a friend. As a result, now, she regards him as a friend, but he wants to have with her? Her mood now is very complicated, a complete mess. The original plan was to return the identity to Shan Mingzi and Shan's mother after investigating the truth of the year, and leave the imperial capital after the matter was properly handled. But now her identity as the illegitimate daughter of the Li family involves more and more things, and it is getting deeper and deeper. If this continues, it will be impossible to go according to plan. Moreover, now there is a huge bug in her plan. She knew very well that so far her feelings for Chi Jinkai had not reached the point of liking him, so she could only pretend not to understand what he meant just now. Li Ju sat up and took out his mobile phone. If one day you find that the person around you likes you, what will you do? He Yao replied instantly. Xiao-san, boss, has third uncle confessed his love to you? Li Ju twitched the corner of his mouth. How do you know it's him, I'm asking? Please take it a step further. Li Ju narrowed his eyes. Xiao-san, boss, seriously, haven't you noticed that you have become more and more peaceful since you met your third uncle? It was like a tyrannosaurus being smoothed. People like them who were usually tortured had a very comfortable time. These are all attributed to Chi Jinkai. Seventh sister has already said that your condition should not be irritable or irritable. Isn't it good now? Boss, why don't you try it with your third uncle? Fall in love without suffering any loss. Li Ju looked at her words and suddenly realized something was wrong. Third uncle? Where have you and Chi Anyun progressed? Hey, brother and Yan promised to fall in love with me when I grow up. Boss, you still need to work hard. Li Ju. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 288. Chapter 288. This question is too simple. Li Ju laughed in a low voice and called him a little bastard. Finally couldn't help but attack him. Yes, it's lightning fast, so you have to learn from it, boss. I am like you. Li Ju typed a few words hard, put the phone aside, and ignored it. He Yao, who was still in class at school, was fiddling with her mobile phone under the desk when the teacher turned around to write on the blackboard. When she saw the words Li Ju, the corner of her mouth couldn't help but twitch. You can just pretend, He Yao snorted twice and complained. She is still learning a lesson, I guess there will be a time when she will be really fragrant. At this moment, she suddenly felt strangely quiet around her. When she raised her head, everyone, including the teacher on the podium, was looking straight at her. He Yao. The teacher angrily hit the blackboard twice with a triangle ruler. Even though she was so far away, she could still feel the wall shaking 3 times. He Yao, since you said I was pretending, then you come and solve this problem. An angry voice sounded, and the students around him suddenly looked sympathetically. If you dare to mess with the fire-breathing female Tyrannosaurus, You are a wolf killer. He Yao's mouth twitched, feeling that she was innocent and didn't say anything to her, so why did she have such a big reaction? It's just that the female teacher was writing in front of her and it was very quiet. In comparison, her pretentious sentence was particularly abrupt. He Yao sighed and explained helplessly, "Teacher, I didn't tell you." Seeing her standing there without responding, the female teacher frowned, a trace of disgust flashing in her eyes. "Don't think that you can do whatever you want just because Teacher Chi protects you. You openly insult the teacher in class. Do you have any education at all?" The female teacher's words became more and more serious. She was so angry that she didn't even notice her slip of the tongue. He Yao narrowed her eyes slightly, her face turned cold, and she repeated calmly, "Teacher, I told you I didn't scold you." "Then who are you scolding? Everyone around you is listening attentively to the lecture, and no one is talking to you. Who else can you scold?" The female teacher didn't believe what she said and thought she was scolding herself. He Yao's breath sank, a sneer flashed in her eyes. She put her phone on the desk, got up in the eyes of everyone in the class who were surprised and even horrified, walked step by step from the back row of the classroom to the podium, and stood face to face with her. Seeing that she dared to come up, the female teacher sneered. Just as she was about to speak, she saw her turn around and pick up the chalk. She glanced at it lightly and started writing on the blackboard. Seeing her like this, the female teacher snorted coldly and looked at her with disdain. With her usual grades, how could she possibly be able to solve this carefully chosen final question? In less than a minute, He Yao put down the chalk, rubbing her index finger and thumb back and forth to wipe off the chalk dust. He Yao raised her lips and smiled softly, saying, "It's true that you are pretending. If you use your method to solve this problem, I'm afraid not many people can imitate the teacher. Are you showing off your knowledge? What do you know? There is only the solution to this question, you." The unfinished words disappeared in her throat. The female teacher opened her eyes wide and looked at the solution steps she wrote on the blackboard in disbelief. Succinct, concise, easy to understand, and all the knowledge learned is used. This solution can easily make people's eyes light up and enlighten them at once. It is indeed much simpler than hers. The female teacher subconsciously looked back at the other students. Almost all of them had a look of realization on their faces, which was completely different from the frown they just had. Impossible. How could you do this kind of question? Did you peek at the answer? She doesn't believe that He Yao can do this kind of question anyway. This is not consistent with her usual results at all. He Yao looked at her and thought silently in her heart, is she even worthy of being a teacher with this level of IQ? Do you still need to peek at the answer to this kind of question? He Yao put her hands in the pockets of her school uniform and asked casually, causing her face to change suddenly. "Please, teacher, I don't know if you want to show off your knowledge by asking this question or something else, but you picked the wrong question. It's too easy." As the last few words came out, the female teacher's face suddenly became extremely ugly. "He Yao." The female teacher gritted her teeth and said word by word, "You are deliberately trying to prevent me from getting off the table, are you?" He Yao raised her hand with an innocent expression, "Teacher, you asked me to come up and do the questions." The female teacher's face suddenly felt like she had been slapped, and it hurt. She clenched her fists and looked at He Yao with gloomy eyes, her face turned livid with anger. The atmosphere fell into a brief dead silence. The people sitting below all gasped, their eyes cautiously hovering between He Yao and the female teacher, and the screen was filled with barrage of comments in their hearts. Hum, the hot-tempered fire-breathing female teacher confronts the school bully who is untouchable. It's so exciting. I could watch such a wonderful show in my last math class. Value. Unfortunately, the scene was interrupted before it was finished. The bell rang for the end of get out of class. The sound of students joking could be heard outside, but the classroom was deathly quiet. The female teacher glared at He Yao fiercely, snorted coldly, stepped over her on high heels, and left the classroom. The next second, the classroom exploded. Holy shit, He Yao, you are awesome, you dare to mess with a female fire-breathing dragon, as expected of you. Several classmates who were having fun with He Yao suddenly expressed their true feelings. Hey, classmate He Yao, may I know how you came up with the question you just asked? Some students with better grades who were not familiar with her on weekdays also took the initiative to speak. He Yao, if you offend the math teacher, she will definitely wear small shoes for you in the future. Be careful yourself, or tell teacher Chi. Most other people are still worried about He Yao provoking the female teacher. After all, the female teacher's reputation in the school has always been that she must retaliate, and she will basically retaliate against anyone who offends her. No matter how powerful He Yao is, she is still a student at the end of the day. If she is resented by the teacher, there will be many chances of being scolded in the future. He Yao frowned at the quarrel between them, and stretched out her hand to signal them to be quiet. The voices of the people around me were a little quieter. He Yao chuckled and answered their questions one by one. Yes, as expected of me. Well, if you want to know, I'll tell you later. Thank you for your concern, but, am I afraid of her? Her tone was particularly contemptuous in the last sentence. Do I need to be afraid of people who come in through the back door? The fact that the female teacher came in through connections was posted on the school forum for a week, and it became so popular that now the whole school knew that she was a connection person, but she still looked self-conscious and acted arrogantly wherever she went. As if she is nobler than others, which is why many teachers and students hate her. But since he knew she was a related household, he really provoked her so blatantly. Everyone was silent for a moment and gave a thumbs up. You are awesome, you are awesome. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 289. Chapter 289. Brother and Yan, why are you so funny? Although He Yao is not afraid of the female teacher's revenge, she is afraid of being called into the office by Chi and Yun. Ayo, what's going on between you and teacher Yu? Chi Anyun looked at He Yao and frowned slightly. She complained to you. He Yao curled her lips in disdain and sneered in her heart. She was still waiting for her revenge, but it turned out that she could only snitch. Chi Anyun's eyes became helpless. She said you didn't respect the teacher in class, and you went out to confront her. He Yao raised her eyebrows, sneered, and asked, Brother Anyun, do you believe it? Do not believe. Their Chi family has raised children, and he watched what kind of temperament he grew up. Isn't he clear? Need that teacher you to make irresponsible remarks? He Yao raised the corners of her mouth, with a smile on her face, and threw herself into Chi Anyun's arms. She put her head on his shoulder and said coquettishly, I knew Brother Yan was the best. The girl's soft hair stuck to the crook of her neck, almost hanging on her body like a koala. Chi Anyun slowly raised the corners of his mouth in a corner where she couldn't see, but quickly put it down again and stretched out his hand. Pull her away. He Yao reluctantly stood in front of him and glanced at him aggrievedly. Her eyes were full of regret. She hadn't hugged him enough. Noticing the obvious look in He Yao's eyes, Chi Anyun coughed lightly and tried to make his voice more serious. You haven't made it clear yet, what exactly happened? He Yao's expression froze. She lowered her head and said vaguely, that's it? What kind? Chi Anyun asked. He Yao sighed and said, I was chatting with someone and accidentally made a complaint, but the person named you said that I scolded her. After saying that, she secretly glanced at Chi Anyun's face, and as expected, the latter's face turned dark immediately. He Yao. How many times have I told you not to use mobile phones in class? Chi Anyun said sharply. He Yao winced, her eyes averted, and she called her by her first and last name. She was really angry. It's so miserable, Every time he gets angry it takes a long time to calm him down. He won't go without talking to her for several days this time, right? He Yao lowered her eyelashes and did not dare to say anything. Seeing her lowering her head and not speaking, looking guilty, Chi Anyun tried hard to suppress the anger in her heart, gritted her teeth and asked, "What next?" He Yao looked up at him, then quickly looked away, raised her hand and pinched her earlobe, and said, "Then she asked me to go up to solve the problem. I didn't want to go, but what she said was too unpleasant, so I got angry. Go up and solve the problem." Chi Anyun narrowed his eyes while listening. "Well, so you did the questions." The next moment, he suddenly reacted and looked at her in surprise, forgetting even his anger for a moment. "You said you finished the question." He Yao nodded. Chi Anyun's eyes lit up with joy, and he put the criticism of her behind him. He turned around, took out a pen and paper from the drawer, put it into her hand, and said, "Show me the question and the answer you wrote." He Yao looked at the blank A4 paper in her hand, and the corner of her mouth twitched. How could she remember the questions she had solved? However, seeing Chi Anyun's serious expression, He Yao pondered for a while and wrote another question on the paper that was similar to her level. Chi Anyun picked it up and read the questions, and then took a look at her solution to the problem. His eyes lit up, and a look of joy suddenly appeared on his face, and he said appreciatively, "Ah Yao, yes, you have made progress." Knowing how to write a proof and having a clear idea is a huge improvement for He Yao. Chi Anyun couldn't help but feel relieved. As long as you continue to work hard, your grades will definitely improve. He Yao. He Yao smiled at him, very far-fetched. It's just that Chi Anyun didn't notice anything strange about her at all, and was immersed in great joy at this time. He was happy for a while, and then he took on the role of the class teacher and began to use the tone he usually used when talking to other students. "Ah Yao, I have told you a long time ago that you are not stupid, you just don't want to learn. You see, working hard now is not is there any reward. Effort and learning are directly proportional. There is no such thing as a born genius, only an acquired lazy person." He Yao's expression was stiff and she could hardly hold back the smile on her face. "How does it feel when your boyfriend talks to you like a class teacher?" "It's exciting and confusing anyway." He Yao didn't want to listen anymore. She was afraid that she would go crazy, so she immediately interrupted his thoughts. "Who says there is no such thing as a natural genius? I've seen it." Chi Anyun was stunned and asked subconsciously, "Who is it?" He Yao looked at him with bright eyes and said seriously, "You." Chi Anyun. "Brother Yan, look, you are an honorary professor of Imperial University at such a young age. This is a height that many people will never reach in their lifetimes. Moreover, you have been excellent in both conduct and learning since you were a child. You are a typical kid from other people's families. You have received many awards. A room in the old house is filled with piles. Even Grandpa Chi said that you are a rare genius in the Chi family, and—" "Stop." Chi Anyun interrupted her. She really couldn't bear to hear these compliments coming out of her mouth. "It sounds weird. And I didn't feel it just now, but now I feel that it is particularly awkward to speak to her in the tone of the head teacher. It seems that my girlfriend has been scolded, and she even feels a little uncomfortable. Even though the person who taught her was himself." Chi Anyun's eyes instantly turned strange. What kind of weird feeling is this? Moreover, you haven't agreed to be her boyfriend yet? Why did you directly take in your boyfriend's emotions? Brother Yan. He Yao secretly observed his expression, and seeing that she had successfully changed the topic, she immediately continued her efforts, stretched out her little finger to hook his palm, and said coquettishly, "I know what you mean, I will work hard in the future." The last law sound was dragged out extremely long, and she dragged it out into a delicate and artificial sound. Chi Anyun felt that the palm of her hand that had been touched by her felt hot, and she subconsciously wanted to avoid it, but her body did not move at all. Hearing her coquettish tone, my eyelids twitched, I felt very uncomfortable, and my ears gradually turned pink. Despite this, my face was expressionless and she said, "Speak to me properly." He Yao stared at his face for a few seconds, and then burst into laughter. How could she not know that he was shy after living together for so long? So He Yao teased him even more, "Brother and Yan, I'm just talking nicely. Isn't it nice? Why are you such a bastard?" Chi Anyun's face immediately turned as black as the bottom of a pot. He Yao couldn't help it and burst into laughter. "Ha ha ha ha, brother and Yan, why can't you help being so funny?" Chi Anyun looked at her expressionlessly, hummed softly, suddenly stretched out his hand, and pulled her into his arms. He Yao was still smiling 1 second, and the next second she was in someone's arms, and she didn't react for a while. She heard a burst of warm breath spraying on her neck. "Who did you call funny just now?" End of this chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 290. Chapter 290. What does he like about her? The smile on He Yao's face suddenly froze, and the skin on the back of her neck suddenly felt cold. She immediately smiled and said, "No, I didn't tell anyone." Chi Anyun lowered his head and came closer, looked at her profile carefully, and suddenly smiled, "Are you scared?" He Yao gritted her teeth and said with a sound that was almost squeezed out from between her teeth, "If you can, take your hands away." Her eyes moved down and fell on Chi Anyun's hand on her waist, which seemed to be pinching her flesh. Ever since he found out that she was ticklish, he had been threatening her like this. "Do you dare to try another method?" He Yao's face was full of anger, and she gritted her teeth and glared at the person who threatened her. "What do you call me, huh?" Chi Anyun raised his eyebrows and squinted his eyes slightly. A flash of danger flashed in his eyes. He stretched his hand forward, trying to tickle her flesh. Aware of the danger coming from her waist, He Yao changed her tune decisively and stopped him in time, "Brother and Yan." Chi Anyun then retracted his hand, touched her head, and chuckled, "That's good." He Yao was held in his arms, feeling his palm touching her head, and still pursed her lips angrily. Snort. Brother and Yan has changed. He is no longer the Chi Anyun who doted on her before. Men, as expected, don't cherish what they get. He Yao snorted coldly, broke away from his embrace, turned around and made a face at him, saying, "You big pig's hooves, I don't want to care about you anymore." After saying that, she ran away, leaving Chi Anyun stunned on the spot, his hands still in mid-air, maintaining the same movement as before. Hearing this, Chi Anyun immediately couldn't laugh or cry. What's wrong with him? Fortunately, the resources of number 1 middle school are the best in Daijing, and each teacher has an independent office. Otherwise, if others saw teacher Chi, who had never had many expressions, suddenly showing an extremely bright smile, they would probably be shocked. Chin. At this time in Jingyuan, Li Ju threw the phone aside and ignored what He Yao said. He was so irritated that he lay on the bed thinking about life. She didn't understand when Chi Jingkai fell in love with her, or in other words, why did he like her? Li Ju thought about it and recalled what happened after meeting Chi Jingkai several times, and suddenly realized that she was the one who took the initiative to flirt with him before. More than once. Li Ju felt that she had no hope of life anymore. I think back then, she was also the Neptune who flirted with many people, but now she has fallen apart. Moreover, the object of the rollover may not be provoked or avoided. Li Ju's head hurt even more when he thought of this. Otherwise, she would go to Ji Yunsha tomorrow to get a medical certificate, saying that she was terminally ill, and persuade him to give up. No. It is impossible to say that Chi Jinkai's performance will explode on the spot, so she directly dismissed Ji Yunchu, who gave her a medical certificate, as a quack doctor. How about saying she already has someone she likes? Li Ju shook his head and rejected the idea. With Chi Jinkai's IQ, how could he not see it? What if he allows himself to bring people to him? Li Ju hammered the bed extremely irritably, and a large piece of the bed immediately sank, which was enough to show how much force she had used. This won't work, and that won't work, so how can we make Chi Jinkai give up on her? Why did Chi Jinkai fall in love with her? She was stunned by her temper, and she was too lazy to die at all without paying attention to her appearance and what she dressed. She could still see it. How could his turtle hair perfection, how could she see her? This is not logical. It stands to reason that shouldn't boys like girls who are compatible with their personalities? She threw him into the bath water the first time they met, and even teased him the second time they met. No matter how you look at it, they should be enemies for thousands of years, right? Li Ju, ah. What does he like about me? Chi Jinkai, all. Li Ju, give me 3 days and I will change everything. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 291. Chapter 291 Going to live with my sister-in-law. After being depressed all night, Li Ju couldn't think of a reason, and finally decided to avoid Chi Jinkai for the time being. However, before she could find a good reason, she saw Chi Jinkai standing in front of her bedroom door dragging his suitcase and saying, "The company has something to do and I need to go on a business trip for a few days." Li Ju's eyes brightened slightly as her heart became a mess. Going on a business trip? Chi Jinkai nodded, "Well, so you take care of your home these days." Li Ju was so excited when she heard him talking about a business trip that she didn't even notice how ambiguous the word housekeeping in his mouth was. "I understand, let's go." Li Ju waved her hands as usual, indicating that she understood, and tried hard to hide the excitement in her heart. Seeing that her reaction was so bland, Chi Jinkai's face darkened for a moment as expected. He held the handle of the suitcase tightly, looked at her with a deep look in his eyes, and then went out without saying anything. Seeing him come out, Jingyi and Jing-er immediately took the suitcase from his hand. "Sir, the people over in who are already waiting, should we go now or?" Chi Jinkai got into the car and said with a cold face, "Leave now." The 3 words were as if frozen, making Jingyi shiver. He glanced at Chi Jinkai cautiously in the rearview mirror. "What's going on, looking so gloomy?" Jing-er in the passenger seat kicked him, and he immediately looked away, not daring to look again. Chi Jinkai took a deep breath, which caused the air pressure in his body to be extremely low. The 2 people driving in front of him almost froze to death along the way. He just doesn't understand why there are people with low emotional intelligence like Li Ju in this world. He felt like he was trying to pry open a piece of stone, or a diamond. Li Diamond Ju breathed a sigh of relief after Chi Jinkai left. Originally, she was struggling with how to face him, but now she no longer had to worry about it. Actually, it's not that she dislikes Chi Jinkai, it's just that it was a little too sudden, so she should think calmly before speaking. After all, she and him were never the same person. Li Ju stood in the living room, looked around, lowered her eyes, and looked unclear. Then, she took out her car keys and drove to Bai's house. Today not only Chi Jinkai has to go on a business trip, but she also has to go abroad. I said before that I had to deal with the Mo family's affairs and couldn't delay them any longer. Taking advantage of Chi Jinkai's absence these days, I took advantage of the opportunity to deal with them. "Where is your brother?" Li Ju sat in the living room and looked around for a few times, but did not find Bai Yuxiu. "At this time, it seems it's not time to go to work yet, right?" Bai Muiu curled his lips and said, "Going on a business trip." "On business trip?" Li Ju frowned and looked at her. Was he on a business trip again? Is it such a coincidence? Well, you told me a few days ago, otherwise I wouldn't be able to go to Continent S with you. She was injured this time, which frightened Bai Yuxiu. He wanted to stay with her 24 hours a day, and even when he was at work, he would call back from time to time to check on her situation. If this trip had not been cancelled, Bai Yuxiu would definitely not have gone. But this is exactly what she wants. If you leave like this, your brother won't know. Li Ju asked with some uncertainty. She had also seen Bai Yuxiu's sister-in-law. With Bai Muiu still injured at home, how could he not be worried? He would definitely send someone to follow her. A hint of cunning flashed in Bai Muiu's eyes, and she smiled at Li Ju, so I have to rely on you. Huh. Bai Muiu smiled mysteriously and didn't say anything. You said you were going to move to Jingyuan to live with your sister-in-law for a few days. On the other side of the private plane, Bai Yuxiu received a call from Bai Muiu. When he heard what she said, he frowned and subconsciously looked at Qi Jinkai sitting next to him. Hearing him mention Li Ju, Qi Jinkai put down the magazine in his hand and looked up at Bai Yuxiu. Xiao, isn't this good? If you live with your sister-in-law, she will have to take care of you. That would be so troublesome, haha. Bai Yuxiu faced Qi Jinkai's heart-stopping gaze and laughed dryly, trying to make Bai Muiu give up the idea. Ah, my sister-in-law agreed. Bai Yuxiu coughed twice and glanced at Qi Jinkai unconsciously. As expected, the latter's face suddenly darkened. The ambient air temperature suddenly drops to the bottom. Qi Jinkai's face turned slightly blue, and he felt a sudden swelling and pain in his temples. He had only left home for a few hours, and she invited outsiders to her home. Seeing that a storm was about to come, Bai Yuxiu immediately cut off the call as quickly as possible. Xiao, I have something else to do here, so I won't talk to you anymore. You can go live with your sister-in-law, don't cause trouble. After saying that, he hung up the phone and looked at Qi Jinkai with tears in his eyes and said, Third brother, Xiao just lives with my sister-in-law and nothing will happen. You won't even make her jealous, right? Qi Jinkai's eyes flashed, and after a long moment, he pursed his lips and said, No. Can you turn down the air conditioner? Really, especially since they are on a private plane now, it is really cold. If this continues, he will freeze to death. Qi Jinkai glanced sideways at him, and Bai Yuxiu immediately fell silent. It wasn't until Qi Jinkai's face gradually softened that he dared to speak. Third brother, I know you don't want to be separated from your sister-in-law, but there are people in who acting like monsters, and G11 and the others simply can't survive it. Qi Jinkai uttered a few words coldly, then what use do I need them for? Bai Yuxiu. You can't blame them. It's just that those old guys are too evil-minded and they joined forces to plot against each other. Otherwise, how could G11 be captured by them? Qi Jinkai's eyes sharpened, and his aura suddenly dropped. Put an arrest warrant on those old guys in my name. Bai Yuxiu's expression froze. In his name? Does he know what he is talking about? Issuing a wanted order as the head of Organization J means that this person is about to usher in the highlight moment of his life and will be tortured to death by countless top killers and Organization J like a cat playing with a mouse. During this period, they not only had to be on tenterhooks, but also had to evade non-stop pursuits again and again. This was not only physical, but also mental torture. That's why some people say that no one should mess with Jing Junyu, the head of J organization. If you mess with him, he will definitely let you know how many new, shocking and tortured ways to die in the world. Bai Muiu hung up the phone with a smile on his face and raised his eyebrows at Li Ju beside him. How are you doing, boss? My idea is good, right? Li Ju sneered, that's right. When we go to S State, your brother finds out that you and I are not in the imperial capital. By then, not only you, but I will also be implicated. This girl has such a good idea, let her testify. Bimweo chuckled and said, "Boss, it's okay. As long as I'm with you, my brother won't be suspicious." Li Ju glanced at her in disbelief. He didn't express much about this. He just raised his wrist and looked at the time and said, "Okay, it's getting late. Let's go quickly." Oh. End of this chapter.